come all to a beautiful show. It's gonna be awesome and some other stuff. Dee-dee-dee-dee-doo-dee-dee-doo-dee-dee-doo-dee. Some other musical stuff.
This is Special Session for Thursday, November 14th, 2024. I'm Brian Schott, Managing Editor of Utah Political Watch. On this week's program, there's nothing new about Republicans doing the business of the state behind closed doors, but it spread beyond the Utah legislature. We'll talk about that. Also, Senator Mike Lee picks the wrong horse in the race for a new leader of the U.S. Senate, and leadership elections on Capitol Hill. We'll discuss all of that and more. Political polling has been hit or miss since 2016, but some pollsters seem to have figured out the secret sauce in the era of Trump. We'll talk with Mike Noble. His firm, Noble Predictive Insights, had the most accurate polling in the Beehive State during the 2024 election, and we'll talk with him about that. Plus, I'll answer some questions from followers on social media. Remember to subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcasts if you're not already. If you are a subscriber, thank you so much. And if you could do me a favor and leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that will help more people find the program. Also, shameless plug here, you can sign up for my newsletter for free at utahpoliticalwatch.news. That's utahpoliticalwatch.news. And if you want to support my work covering Utah politics, you can always become a paying subscriber, and that will help me continue doing this work, make more podcasts like this, and more reporting at utahpoliticalwatch.news. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. If not, why don't you join up right now at utahpoliticalwatch.news. Now that that's out of the way, let's get on to our news roundup from the last week. Item number 1, Utah Republicans doing the state's business behind closed doors. Now, last week it was reported that the Republican members of the Utah State Board of Education met in a closed Republican caucus for the first time ever. There were 13 Republicans and 2 Democrats on the state school board. And last week, for the first time ever, the Republicans on the state school board held a closed caucus meeting where it was just the Republicans invited. Not all of them attended, but this is the first time that it has happened. This is a direct result of the state going to partisan school board elections in 2016. In the past, it has been a nonpartisan election, but this is the third election where we've had those partisan members. And now the 13 Republicans, who obviously hold a supermajority on the state school board, are starting to meet in a closed caucus that's just for the Republican members. This is not a violation of the state's open meetings law, so don't think about that. But it just doesn't look very good. I mean, it's a party meeting. That's why it's not subject to the open meetings law. This is very similar to what the Republicans in the Utah legislature do in the House and Senate. The 61 Republicans in the House and the 23 Republicans in the Senate, whenever they have caucus meetings, they are closed. I've covered the Utah legislature long enough to remember when the Republicans and the Democrats had open caucus meetings. The Democrats mostly have open caucus meetings, but that doesn't really matter. The Republicans are the ones who are making the decision, and a lot of the decision making, a lot of the differences over policy are hammered out in those closed caucus meetings. There's a couple of examples from earlier this year that you can point to. Look at what happened with the baseball stadium, the negotiations over whether they were going to be able to renovate the west side, build a baseball stadium, use some taxpayer money, or generate taxpayer revenue to help pay for that. The majority of those negotiations were done behind closed doors. Same thing with the hockey arena, where there's going to be lots of taxpayer money involved to renovate the downtown area and help renovate the area around the hockey arena for the new Utah Hockey Club. those negotiations, the bulk of them were done behind closed doors. You would see the lobbyists for these organizations going into the doors where the Republicans are having their closed caucus meetings, and then they would come out, and then there would be some announcement as to what the policy was going to be. So it's pretty clear that they're making those decisions behind closed doors. Now, they aren't taking a vote. It's not official when they're behind closed doors. They do have committee hearings and they do take a vote on the floor, but for all intents and purposes, those are just kabuki theater. And that is what could be happening, or at least we're seeing the start of, with the state school board. There's really no meaningful debate happening in the public. They're working out a lot of the differences behind closed doors in these closed caucus meetings. Is it illegal? No. Does it look good? Absolutely not. And this is what you get when you have a supermajority by one party in a governmental body. They can go into closed caucus and say, it's just a meeting of the party members, and that's where they can hammer out the differences, and then they come out in public, and everything beyond that is just pro forma. It's already a fait accompli. And so that's what you're seeing now trickle down to the state school board. Item number 2, Senator Mike Lee backs the wrong horse in the race for Senate Majority Leader again. Earlier this week, Senator Mike Lee endorsed Florida Senator Rick Scott for Senate Majority Leader. Scott was a favorite of the MAGA crowd. They were pushing really hard for him to become the Majority Leader, but that did not happen. He was eliminated in the first round of voting. Instead, South Dakota's John Thune was elected to the position to replace Mitch McConnell. Thune is a strong ally of McConnell, and that is not sitting well with a lot of the MAGA types, but this was a secret ballot behind closed doors. This is the second time that Lee bet on Scott and it did not pay off. If you'll remember, in 2022, Lee backed Scott's challenge to Mitch McConnell for Republican leader, then the minority leader, but Lee pushed him to replace McConnell. That didn't work out, and in response, Lee was punished by McConnell. He was removed from some of his committee assignments in retaliation for doing that. So was Scott. I don't think Lee is going to get punished this time around. This was an open election for the leader of the Republican caucus in the Senate. There was no sitting leader at the time, unlike with McConnell in 2022. So I don't think Lee is going to get punished for that. But what we're seeing is just a continuation of a theme where Lee really does not have a lot of pull in the Republican caucus in Washington. I can't really remember the last time he got anything major done outside of the criminal justice reform that he passed in the last Trump administration. And you're really not seeing him with a lot of influence in that caucus because he went in hard for Scott. He was pushing really hard, and he had some requirements or some things that he would like to see the next majority leader do, the way that they handled the floor, the way that they handled the caucus. We'll see if those get implemented, but my guess is we won't see a majority of them taken up because clearly Lee just does not have a lot of influence in the Republican caucus. He's beloved here in the state of Utah, but among his colleagues, he's pretty low in the pecking order. Another little bit of news about Lee this week, he was passed over or likely passed over as Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General. There were reports that Lee was becoming a leading candidate to become the Attorney General in the next Trump administration, which begins in January. And then on Wednesday, Donald Trump made the shock announcement that he was picking Florida Representative Matt Gaetz. It says a lot about how much influence Lee has when he's passed over for a position by Matt Gaetz. Item number 3, former Representative Chris Stewart was briefly in the mix to become the Director of National Intelligence in the next Trump administration. He resigned from Congress last year, and there were reports this week that his name had surfaced as Trump was considering who to pick for the cabinet-level position of DNI. Last year, Stewart resigned from Congress because his wife was having health problems, And I guess she's feeling better because this is a cabinet level position. This is a major job in Washington. So she must have recovered enough for him to consider this cabinet level position in Washington. That didn't happen for Stewart, though. We know Tulsi Gabbard, former Democratic member of Congress, she was named to the job. In 2020, Stewart was a leading candidate to become the next director of national intelligence. This was probably in February or March of 2020. Then National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien was pushing Trump to pick Stewart, who was on the House Intelligence Committee. And Stewart was believed to be the leading candidate for that job. But then reports came out that Stewart was dumped after Trump learned that Stewart had compared him to Mussolini during a talk at the University of Utah in 2016 during the presidential campaign. Stewart said that Trump was, quote, our Mussolini. Not exactly the kind of comments you want to make if you are hoping for a position in the Trump administration, because as we all know, Trump is not very forgiving. Stewart really wanted that job in 2020. He didn't get it. It sounds like that desire hasn't gone anywhere because out of left field, his name was all of a sudden in the mix as the possible DNI, and he didn't get it again. Item number 4, leadership elections at the Utah legislature. The House and the Senate Republicans elected their leaders for the upcoming session. In the House, things stay the same. Mike Schultz is the speaker again. Jefferson Moss is the majority leader. Carrie Ann Lisenby is the majority whip. And Casey Snyder will be the assistant majority whip. Over on the Senate, there was a bit of a shakeup, though. Stewart Adams is the president. He continues as the president of the Senate in another term. Kirk Cullimore is the new majority leader. He replaces Evan Vickers in that spot. Chris Wilson is now the majority whip. Cullimore was in that job, so now it's Chris Wilson. And Senator Mike McKell is the new assistant majority whip who replaces Ann Milner in that job. So Vickers is out as majority leader. Milner is out as assistant majority whip. And they said in public at a press conference after the elections that it was a very cordial process. But I've been told that this move, this change had been in the works for a few months. President Stewart Adams, as I've been told by some fairly well-placed sources, was not happy with some of the pushback he was getting, some of the criticism he was getting from Vickers and Milner in their closed caucus meetings on a number of issues, school funding, Amendment D, issues like that. In public, they were on board. They were very supportive. They, played the happy warrior. They were very, there was no criticism in public of these issues. But in those closed caucus meetings, I'm told that Vickers and Milner were critical or pushed back a little bit. And that was enough for Adams. And that's why they are out of leadership. And Cullimore, Wilson, and McKell are in. Now, the next thing to watch in the legislature, and this is probably coming in the next couple of weeks, is just what happens with committee assignments. Brady Brammer is moving from the House to the Senate. He is the chair of the House Rules Committee. He's going to move up, so we're going to have a new Rules Committee chair. Watch to see who gets the chairmanship of the standing committees in both the House and the Senate, and then the chairmanships of the Appropriations Committee. It will be fascinating to see who is put into those positions and who is out as they get ready to start the legislature again in January. Item number 5, Representative Blake Moore is reelected as vice chairman of the House GOP conference. He thought about running for the number 4 spot in the Republican conference after Representative Elif Stefanik was nominated by Donald Trump to become the ambassador to the United Nations. He thought better of it, so he is not going to be running for that position. But this is a very good thing for the state of Utah to have a member of the congressional delegation in a leadership role. So congratulations to Representative Moore getting reelected to his spot in the House Republican caucus. Coming up, political polling has been under the spotlight since 2016, and it hasn't gone so well for a lot of pollsters. We're going to talk with pollster Mike Noble of Noble Predictive Insights. He had the most accurate pre-election polls in Utah this year. Republican gubernatorial primary, he was spot on. He was extremely close to the final result in the gubernatorial race, in the U.S. Senate race, in the presidential race. We're going to talk with Mike Noble about the secret sauce that he has when it comes to polling and how his firm and industry is adapting to changes in technology and a changing electorate. That's coming up next. Joining us now on the podcast is Mike Noble. He is the national pollster with Noble Predictive Insights, and might I also say the most accurate pollster when it came to the Utah election results over the last year. Mike Noble, thank you so much for joining the show.
Brian, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Let's talk about your general election poll. You pretty much nailed the statewide races. You were right on top of how the governor's race ended up, and the U.S. Senate race. Let's start way at the top with the presidential race. Your polling showed you predicted that Trump would win the state by 20 points, and he, according to the unofficial results, is just a little bit over 20 points. How were you so accurate when we saw other polling that was bad, other polling that was off? I mean, I don't even want to talk about the Ann Seltzer poll out of Iowa, which was wildly off. Talk about your process and the things that you did to accurately predict what the electorate was going to look like.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And yeah, this was probably a tough year for certain pollsters. I mean, Ann Seltzer, a legend going into the election, coming out, definitely took a hit. So for us, I mean, the polling industry really didn't change for about 7 decades, but in this last 10 years, there's just been a massive shift. I mean, not only in technology, saw people operate with polls. So like before, you just do live caller and call it a day. Now there's so many more different modes of collection and how to go about it. Text to online, there's opt-in panels. I mean, you're seeing a wide variety of methods used because of these generational differences. And so, at the end of the day, you have to get your population and make sure you have a representative population, and you're getting good results. So a lot of people only see the end result or the end percentage. The thing is, a lot goes into a poll to make it happen. So first thing is your data source. Where's your data source coming from? For us personally, so if our goal is to predict or have a good gauge on which way voters are going or how they're going to make this decision in the ballot box, you'd want to start with that universe. And so do you trust them being self-verified or go right to the source? Well, if you go to the source, just go right to the voter file with the Utah Secretary of State. So when you look at that, you start with that base. So like we know unequivocally who is able to play. Because if you're not registered to vote, you can't play. For us, so we start with that as your base. That's what we prefer. Next is, you want to double verify those folks in your survey instrument. And so making sure you go through and really verify that they are likely to vote in the election, because if you get their opinion and they don't land up voting, that's going to throw you off a little bit. And also making sure when you're in the survey, ask how they're going to make that decision. A lot of pollsters I see make the mistake. They don't actually ask it how the Utah voter, when they go in that voting booth to make that decision, what that actually looks like, because it should be reflective. You're trying to simulate that decision-making choice. So if you're leaving off like third-party candidates, et cetera, again, I think you're going to miss it. So we try to be reflective of the decision being made. And then finally, I think it's, turnout modeling, et cetera. So half the battle is getting the right respondents and asking the questions and getting it unbiasedly. But the other half of it too is like, what is turnout going to look like? And I think that can be a struggle for folks. And like this election, we saw like higher turnout in the rurals, et cetera. So like you have to factor all that stuff in basically before you make your decision. And also I think the other thing why we're accurate is that I think a lot of people try to predict what the election is going to be ahead of time. And we've come to the conclusion, you're kind of like, think of it as like you're flying a plane, and instead of knowing exactly like how you're going to land it, well, when you're flying, like look at your gauges, like what's your elevation, what's your speed, what are the wind speeds? I've never flown a plane, so I hope those things are correct. Anyways, point is you have all these gauges, instruments, End of the day, you should really just look at those instruments with a very wide eye. And then based on what you're seeing as you're getting ready to land the plane or you're coming into election day, then you dial in and say, all right, this is what I think it should be. And I think a lot of people run into it with biases. And by doing that, you may miss some things that ultimately the data is telling you. And ultimately, that's what we should follow. Because when we're doing it just based on our opinions, and not much science to it then, right?
There's a lot of stuff that you brought up that I wanted to follow up on. Let's start with the last thing you said about modeling what the electorate is going to look like. There was a lot of talk about people were looking at these polls, not only here in Utah, but nationwide, and they were wondering if their modeling was correct. And people were trying to predict this election based on what the 2020 election looked like, trying to get the turnout from there. And there were people doing their models on that. There were people trying to look at this election through the lens of what happened in 2020. And that really didn't work out for people because we saw a lot of first-time voters come in, and that wasn't accounted for. I mean, Trump did get a lot of first-time voters in 2020, but he got even more this time. He got a surge among a number of minority groups that probably people didn't capture in their polling. And at the end of the day, that's why polling is so hard, especially in this day and age, because, younger people don't answer their phones, or maybe they don't, or they don't want to answer these questions. And so pollsters have to weight what they think the electorate is going to look like. And a lot of people just got it wrong again.
Yeah, I mean, with modeling, there's a couple of things. One is you look at the past election results, so we would look at the last few. Also, you look at population changes because, for example, post-COVID, which, since 2020, COVID made a big change. So when you look at like the state of Utah, for example, Utah is in the top 5 or 6 states in the country that saw the biggest population growth post-COVID, because what you're doing is you're seeing people kind of segment themselves of let's say they're living in California, like, oh, I want to move over to Utah or Texas, et cetera. And so Utah had a big population growth. So you had a lot of new folks come in, which didn't have any vote history. However, they could easily be high propensity voters that have come in. So I think we take that into account as the population aspect and also newly registered. And when you're looking at when you're asking folks, how likely to vote in the election, we'll take that into account. So based on secondary data, also modeling, I felt really good about our number. I think where a lot of people had some hiccups, and even us, I think we had Trump at 54% of his vote share, and he ended up at 59. And part of that was why we weren't right on the money with Trump's numbers, because you had an extra 100,000 voters come out and vote, but when that weren't planning on it, but also a chunk of them only voted on the presidential race and didn't bother to vote for anything else down ticket. So
That's
he's a surge at the top. And then, but hey, did that, percolate down to, or did that distill down into Senate and the local races, et cetera? And we saw it in state after state.
You also mentioned measuring what voters do when they go into the voting booth or when they fill out their ballot. And that's, you included, because we had a prominent write-in campaign here in the state, especially for the office of governor, Phil Lyman, and you had him at about 15% support. He got pretty close. He got just over 9%, which is remarkable for a write-in candidate. A lot of other pollsters didn't take that into account, and then they saw their results completely off. But talk about how you presented that to voters, because Phil Lyman didn't appear on the ballot. So how was that decision process made in order to capture those voters who were going to write him in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And first point is that, with the pollsters on, I was kind of beside myself. I saw a couple polls out there on record. I think, I don't want to name names, but Deseret News, for example, they had theirs and they didn't have Lyman in there. And I'm like, you're going to be off by a mile because, for example, let's say they did have his number right in the money at 9%. That's 9 points unaccounted for. You're going to just whiff it by a mile. And it was also unique because you don't really see write-ins do an active campaign. So Lyman was running an active campaign. He was spending money. He was doing all the things that would actually move the needle, not just hey, I'm a write-in and that's it. He was doing earned media. He was doing events. He was spending decent money, which honestly, my 20-year career of doing this, I don't think I've really seen anybody do that where they lost primary and then go do that. So it was kind of an anomaly. But then other folks, did poll it, and we were the closest, hands down, for the write-in. It was 20%. The next closest person had it, and for us, we had 15. It ended up being 9, so only being 6 points off. And we even said in the release that we expect that number to be lower because traditionally write-ins will score higher than they actually perform. So, we were expecting that. And so now to your question, how did we do it? Well, I think it's simple as how do you simulate that decision-making process? So you ask them, just like on the ballot, the names, right? And then for the portion for write-in, we didn't offer up the name saying, oh, hey, what about Phil Lyman as a write-in? It said the option was, XYZ candidate and then write-in. And then if they selected that, it would then open a box saying, please specify, or like they had to write it in like you would on the ballot. And so we took those and computed all those, anyone that had somewhat close spelling, because you'll get like LIMON and stuff like that for the last name. Anyways, so we accounted for that, and again, that's why I think we were so accurate on it, because again, you want to simulate that decision. I think that's why some other groups got a much higher number than we did, because they offered up the name or like gave them an assist. Which when you're filling out the ballot, you don't get an assist. I mean, you gotta punch it in or write it in.
Is it more difficult to poll a state that is overwhelmingly dominated by one party? Here in Utah, Republicans, after these elections, they've won 59 straight statewide elections in a row. Last time the Democrats won a statewide election here in the state was 1992. So they've won 59 in a row. Is it more difficult to get an accurate number when, for all intents and purposes, the Republicans are going to win? It's just a matter of how much?
Yeah, no, again, speak for some of the others, but based on our experience, we expanded out to Utah 3 years ago now. And so polling that, and like for the primaries that happened this election, we ended up nailing all the races we had on record.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think all of them were not only like within a point, but even had all the correct pecking order, like this person would be first, second, third, fourth. So really proud of that performance. But then this general, we did, I think better than anyone else in the country in regards to it. And for us, I don't see the issue, because it's not so much about winning, right? Because with polling, our goal is to measure the mood of the electorate, right? So get a pulse on that electorate to know, like, kind of like, okay, let's say you and I are running, like, are you going to win by 20 points or is it 30 points? I mean, there's a big difference in that. And I think that matters too, because like, as we polled and tested Utah, like a perfect example was noticing in the primaries that even though Spencer Cox won, there was a pretty decent contingent of Republicans that weren't on board. And you really saw this divide in the Republican Party apparatus, which he still ended up winning out at the end of the day. However, that's going to be maybe some issues down the road. Personally, I haven't ran into that, because I think, again, that's the goal or the measure for us, is that, being within that margin of error is kind of how I grade it.
Yeah, and I was going to mention your polling in the primary. I had spoken to people with Governor Cox's campaign, and you had his final total much lower than what they were expecting. They were expecting him to win. I think I was told somewhere around 60% or maybe a little bit higher. And that's not what happened at all. I mean, he ended up winning by about 9 points, but Lyman did much better in the GOP primary. But you were right on with your prediction.
So like I think someone had it, because I think it was us and like Harris X that were on record, so national firm and ours, and basically it was, I'm trying to recall it, they had it like plus 25 or plus 27, something like that for Cox in the primary, and then we put our
it was
poll,
wildly
and
off.
it was plus 11. I think it was plus 10 or 11, somewhere in there. It's been a busy election, but 10 or 11. All right. One says plus 20, let's say 25. One says plus 10 for easy numbers. Okay. We both can't be right. So which one is it? Is it truth in the middle, one, the other? And we put that out there, and we knew it's like, we're either going to have a ton of egg on our face and be wrong, or we're going to be right. And the numbers came out, and you got to trust your data. We were 1 point off. I think he said he run by 10 or 11. He won by 11 or 12. So literally 1 point off of the difference. And, at the end of the day, it'll end up working out for us. Not so much for the other folks, but, and I know when we put that out, people are like, whoa, wait, like he's running away with this thing. I'm like, well, based on, and when we say our data, it's the Utah voters' opinions, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, we just happen to collect all those. We do the voodoo we do and say, all right, this is what we see, or this is what they're telling us. You just got to trust your process. That's the thing about polling, is that you have to trust your process because it has to be replicated. Like, for example, that poll I did, if I handed you exactly how we did that and you replicate it, you should be able to get that same result within a few percentage points and have exactly what we did. And that's the thing, is you have to have that predictability, not, oh, I got the number and now I'm going to move it 5, 10 points to the right because I have a hunch it'll be this way.
Yeah.
And so again, and that's why it is a science and not just, you know, just random doing stuff.
The polling industry, and you touched on this earlier, has changed quite a bit. It used to be, you
Ton.
call somebody and ask them a bunch of questions over the phone. Now, young people don't answer their phone. I don't know the last time I
Response
picked up a
rates. phone
phone call from a number that I don't recognize. We've seen text
Wow.
message polling. There's online polling. There's all sorts of new tools that are coming out. How hard is it for you to keep up with these new tools and find new ways to reach these voters to measure that sentiment, knowing that technology is just the way it's changing is so fast. It's just a breakneck speed. So I'm wondering, as a pollster, how hard is it for you to stay on top of all?
Well, for us, super easy, because I became a pollster about a decade ago, but I founded the organization about 7 years ago. So I kind of came in at the right time when things were just starting to shift. And so, like, one of our core values is basically like adapt or die. And so I'm very big about pushing the envelope when it comes to new, better ways to do things. Because at the end of the day, we have our North Star. Make sure we get the right people. We're getting honest answers, or the sentiment is true. And, and if I have to, if the right way to do it is, let's say you got a Game of Thrones style, strap a survey that you to a what do you call it? A crow or whatever.
A raven?
Raven. Sorry. It's been a little bit.
I just outed myself and as a Game of Thrones fan, but go ahead.
Hey, you scored a point in my book. So like say you attach a survey script to a raven. I fly it out to you because you don't answer people that, call you whatever. But you see this raven there with the, message. You're like, I love Game of Thrones. I'm going to fill this out. You put it on there. That sucker makes it back to me. And you see it's completed. You didn't just like straight line or zigzag, or, those different quality control measures we have. Well, here's the thing. It counts, in my opinion. So, and that's where I've kind of stressed with my team is that, at the end of the day, our North Star remains true. So whether people are responding less, which is an issue in the polling industry, response rates are lower, or how the technology, how they do. But at the end of the day, we need to measure their sentiment or their opinion accurately. And we were actually one of the first to show kind of how progressive we are. I think we were the first in the country to actually apply AI to polling. So when you're doing polling really tells you the what. So like what groups, what are the issues, et cetera. But, and it's quantitative approach, but then you have the qualitative approach, think of focus groups, in-depth interviews, et cetera, where you figure out the why. And usually you have to use both tools to get those answers. By using AI on the open-ended questions, instead of just, ask an open-ended question, they give you kind of just their response. We did the first in the country, added AI into it. And oh my gosh, the results were fantastic. Like it was like someone with a PhD in psychology talking to this person, and it was crazy. I'll send you the link after this. If you have it, or if you want to share
Please
with your
do.
folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we made it all available. So we basically did a case study, like a live run, said, hey, this is what we found. Like the first one trying it. And honestly, I was blown away. Because when I was reading the open-ended responses, it would do these follow-up questions, and I could visualize this voter, this persona of this voter. Like it was a real person talking there. I mean, I was really impressed. So I don't know. So for us, I'd say we're pretty proactive on it, but I think the industry as a whole though is struggling, because especially for these bigger, larger firms, because imagine if you've been doing polling for 30 years and all of a sudden the game has shifted unequivocally. It's like, well, we've always done it this way, just in general. And it's not just our industries in general are usually tougher to pivot for them. So I think we're in this really unique period where it's kind of the old ones, if they don't pivot, they're going to be in trouble. But the ones that are kind of more nimbler and that we're going to see this big class of pollsters kind of get washed out, like an Ann Seltzer and these others, and with new ones taking their place, maybe like Noble Predictive Insights.
The industry is changing. I don't envy you at all because you have to stay on top of all this stuff. But I do envy you because you were really close to the end result here in Utah. And I congratulate you for that. The website is?
I think it's noblepredictiveinsights.com. And then on X, we are, I think, Noble Predictive. Basically, I tell folks is that feel free to sign up. People can sign up for our polls. We do almost like quarterly. It's called the Utah Public Opinion Pulse, or UT-POP for short. We actively measure Utahns' opinions and all the topical issues that are going on. And then we do Arizona, Nevada, and national. Anyways, if you want to check that out, we also do blog post stuff. So if they're into that nerdy stuff, check it out. And I think the big thing is that just trying to make the world a better place, one data point at a time, and making sure people can have trusted data, because we are nonpartisan, not to one side or the other, just, hey, what's the truth? And just trying to give people trusted data for they can make their own decisions on how they want to go about policy decisions.
Well, Mike Noble, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian.
Once again, thank you to Mike Noble of Noble Predictive Insights for joining us on the show. We got some really great questions from followers on social media. I'm going to address some of those in a minute. You can find me on Threads and Blue Sky. My handle is Shott Happens, SCHOTTHAPPENS. I am no longer posting on Twitter and X. Don't try to find me there. I'm keeping that account open just to keep the username, but I am on Blue Sky and Threads, and you can participate and ask your questions of me on those two platforms. All right, on to the mailbag. We got lots of questions this week about the gerrymandering lawsuit, where things stand, when we might expect a decision, will the legislature be required to draw new maps? And it's really an unsatisfying answer that I have for you this week, because there really hasn't been much progress since the Utah Supreme Court ruled that the legislature overstepped its constitutional authority, overstepped its bounds when it gutted Prop 4, the independent redistricting proposition, or the independent redistricting ballot initiative that was passed by voters in 2018. They sent the case back down to a lower court who must decide whether the changes implemented by the legislature were narrowly tailored or if they went too far. The consensus feeling is that lawmakers went too far when they gutted Prop 4, which is part of the reason why they rushed into a special session in August, an emergency special session, to put Amendment D on the ballot, which would have given them the authority to gut any ballot initiative passed by citizens. That's kind of a tell of where they think this whole thing is headed. We're still on hold for a decision, but there have been a number of filings. The most recent decision was last week when 3rd District Judge Diana Gibson blocked the Utah Democratic Party's attempt to intervene in the lawsuit. She said it might be too early for that, and they would be needed if the legislature were required to redraw maps, which a lot of people think is probably going to be the likely outcome of this lawsuit. But again, when that's going to happen, nobody really knows. We just have to keep paying attention to what's going on with the courts. Now, here's something I want you to think about. If the court, as expected, orders the legislature to redraw the maps, and they could redraw the congressional maps and the House and Senate maps, and maybe even the state school board maps. If they order the legislature to redraw the maps and they have to use the guidelines under Prop 4, which are they can't use partisan data and they can't consider where incumbents live. They can't try to protect incumbents by not drawing them into a district with another incumbent. Those are some of the principles that they would have to follow. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that lawmakers might do the same thing that lawmakers in Alabama and Mississippi did when the courts ordered them to redraw their congressional maps. What did they do? Well, they drew maps that did not meet the guidelines put forward by the court, and that caused another delay, and that pushed it out even further. And I can see Utah lawmakers trying the same tactic where they will try to draw maps or adopt maps that do not fit with the guidelines under Prop 4, and then everybody would have to go back to court and there would be more delays. And maybe the whole idea is to push this beyond the 2026 elections, because a lot of people are expecting that we could have new maps by 2026, but lawmakers may try to push that out. So watch this space when that happens. Other questions today. Park Bench Willie on Threads asks, if Senator Lee gets an appointment in the Trump administration, who is his most likely successor? Well, as we know, Senator Lee did not get appointed Attorney General, as a lot of people thought. There is still an outside chance that he could become a member of the Supreme Court. If you remember, he was on the short list of candidates put forth by the Federalist Society during the first Trump administration. Everybody knows that Senator Lee covets a position on the U.S. Supreme Court more than anything. So if he were to end up in the Trump administration or moving to the Supreme Court, you have to look at how the process would play out to try and get a sense of who would replace him. The process works like this. The legislature sends 3 names of potential replacements to the governor. Now, those replacements, those people that they send up, have to be from the same party as the senator who currently holds the seat. So they would be Republicans. The Governor Cox could not pick a Democrat. And there's no universe in which the Republican-dominated legislature would even possibly send a Democratic name up to the governor. So the legislature would be controlling that part of the process, and then the governor gets to pick from those 3 names. That is a law that was changed in the year 2020. Prior to that, it was the state central committee of the party who would send up those 3 names, and the Republican state central committee, let's just say, leans a little bit more to the far right, kind of crazy type of things. I remember when John Swallow stepped down as Attorney General, and there was a battle over who would be named his replacement. Obviously, that was Sean Reyes, was one of the names sent to the governor. There was a huge battle among the more ultra-conservative members of the state central committee, and they were trying to send people like former Representative Morgan Philpott's name to the governor to fill that seat. And Governor Herbert, I was told, made it clear in no uncertain terms that he would not be appointing someone like Morgan Philpott to the seat. So I guess there would be some behind the scenes communications. I'm sure Cox would have some ideas about who he would want to see sent up from the legislature, or who he would want to appoint. And I'm sure the legislature would make it clear which one of the 3 they would like him to appoint. If it is the legislature picking those 3 nominees, you'll probably see current legislators, former legislators. I would not be surprised to see Brad Wilson's name on a list to possibly replace Mike Lee as a temporary replacement. I would not be surprised if current members of the legislature, who knows, maybe House Speaker Mike Schultz would like to be in that seat. Maybe Senate President Stewart Adams would like to be in the U.S. Senate. This is an incredible opportunity, so I would suspect that the behind-the-scenes jockeying to be one of those 3 names is going to be intense if and when Senator Lee steps down. And then after the governor picks a temporary replacement for U.S. Senate, there would be a special election, and the winner of that would fill out the remainder of Lee's term until 2028 when he's up for election again. And in that special election, you will have not only Republicans running, but Democrats and other political parties, because it would be an open election. It's not necessarily just for Republicans, although Republicans have won 59 straight statewide elections since 1992. Another question, Riles28 on Blue Sky asks, are there any Utah GOP remaining, not counting Romney, who have the guts to speak out against an unserious Trump administration? And he's talking about some of the policies that they're going to be pursuing, mass deportations, whether people will be speaking out against that, or whether they will push back against some of the nominations that Donald Trump has made for his cabinet. We already talked about Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. We've talked about Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. As I am recording this, he has announced Robert F. Kennedy Jr., anti-vaccine activist, as his pick for Secretary of Health and Human Services. We saw Fox News host Pete Hegseth named as the Secretary of Defense. And is there anybody in the Republican Party here in Utah, any Republican here in Utah, save for Mitt Romney, who will speak out against these sort of things? And I guess my answer would be it depends on what the issue is, whether they will step out. Could we see Governor Spencer Cox speak out against the Trump administration? I doubt it, because he was a late convert. This summer, he endorsed Trump for president after years pushing back and saying he would not support him as a candidate. So I don't know if Cox would do that or if he would have any credibility in doing so. Could it be John Curtis, brand new member of the Senate? He's not up for re-election until the year 2030, so he's there for 6 years. He's got a lot of time, maybe, possibly, but again, I don't know if he would do that. He hasn't really sought the limelight. Others lower on the political totem pole, I just don't see it. Utah is a solidly Republican state. Although they're not huge supporters of Donald Trump electorally, you get a lot of arguments that I like his policies. They like his policies. I called it the but Gorsuch exception during his first term. I don't like the way Donald Trump handles himself, but he did give us Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch. I don't like Donald Trump's family separation policy, but he did give us Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. It depends on what the issue is going to be. I would not expect a lot of pushback from Utah Republicans. And our last question comes from Jeremy Grimshaw on Threads, and this is a good one. He says, is John Curtis, when he goes to the Senate, is he going to be more Mitty or more Mikey? I don't know which way he's going to go. Curtis has done a really good job of threading that needle so far. He really has not been a huge critic of Trump. I mean, Romney hasn't been a huge critic of Trump, but he's spoken out when there's something he's disagreed with. John Curtis, in the times that I've spoken with him, I've gotten the sense that he's not the biggest fan of Donald Trump, but he understands how party politics work. I suspect that Curtis will be more towards the GOP mainstream as he starts his tenure in the Senate. Lee has been fairly ineffective in the Senate. What's his go-to move? He wants to shut down the government. Anything that he doesn't like, his solution is to shut down the government. But he hasn't really done anything in recent years outside of the criminal justice reform package, which was a big deal, but that was in the last Trump administration. He hasn't been able to really do anything since. My sense is that Curtis wants to get things done in the Senate. There are things that he would like to accomplish. He really wants to work on Bitcoin, and he wants to take the lead in coming up with how the government deals with Bitcoin and regulation of cryptocurrency. And he's also going to be a big player in whatever climate policy comes out of the Senate. And I get the sense that Curtis wants to get stuff done, so I think he'll be less of a bomb thrower. I suspect that his criticisms of Trump, when they come, will be more muted than other people, but also do not expect him to break ranks with the GOP. John Curtis is a Republican, and you have to understand that he is part of the GOP caucus, and that's where his viewpoint comes from. So do not try to map something onto John Curtis politically that just isn't there. And that's it for the mailbag this week. Those were some really great questions, and I thank you so much. Again, if you have questions that you'd like me to discuss on the show, maybe a guest suggestion, you can go to my social channels. The best way is on Blue Sky. You'll find me there. Shot Happens, SCHOTTHAPPENS. Shot Happens on Blue Sky. I also have the same handle under Threads, but I'm much more active on Blue Sky, which is a pretty cool place to be right now. And that's going to do it for this week's episode. Remember to rate and review this podcast to help new listeners find the show. That's the biggest way to help this platform grow and for more people to find the program. You can sign up for my newsletter for free at utahpoliticalwatch.news. It's a free sign up. You'll get that email newsletter in your inbox. Every morning I do a roundup of the top political headlines so you know what's important so you can get informed before you head out the door. And then any news story I publish will also be sent directly to your inbox. All of that is for free. You can also become a paying subscriber and support my work for as little as $5 a month. I know not everybody can afford a subscription. If you can, I would ask you to throw a couple of bucks my way so I can continue doing this work, bring more of these stories, more podcasts, more journalism about politics in Utah, because I think it is so important, especially in this day and age. Remember, follow me on Threads and Blue Sky. My handle is Shot Happens on both sites. You can also send me an email if there's a suggestion, a complaint, a comment about the show. That is shot, SCHOTT, at utahpoliticalwatch.news. Thank you so much for listening. Special Session with Brian Schott is written and produced by me, Brian Schott. We'll talk to you next week.